Well, this is probably the most serious moment in the Egyptian revolution since the 18 days that got rid of Hosni Mubarak back in 2011, because it's now, I think, beyond doubt on a knife edge. It's not clear at this point whether or not the Egyptian army will get away with the process which they are definitely engaged in, which is the process of essentially trying to terminate the revolutionary dynamic that began in 2011 for good. Now that's not an uncontentious statement. There are many different interpretations of what's been going on in Egypt in recent weeks. I just want to do a couple of things to try and explain why I think that's the case and what the prospects for the Egyptian revolution might be from this point onwards. And I'll do that in two ways. I want to, first of all, deal with some straightforward definitions of the institutions in Egyptian society which are facing off against one another at the moment, because I think there's a tendency to draw an equivalence between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Egyptian army by some good people who wish the revolution well, and I think it would be useful if we just have a moment of clarity before dealing. This is the second thing that I want to do with the dynamic, with the process of the Egyptian revolution. Just pause and give that definitional question some thought. So I'm going to do this with the army and with the Muslim Brotherhood, so that we understand the institutions that we're dealing with, or at least have an outline of the institutions that we're dealing with. Now, the Egyptian army is altogether a greater part of the ruling class in Egypt than practically any armed force anywhere in the world. The armed forces always form a core of the ruling class, always form an irreducible core of the state machine. Once you've lost control over the army and the armed forces, if you're a ruling class, you've lost control of the state machine. You're at the moment where you're going to dissolve as an effective ruling group in the society. That's true in every society. Lenin's definition of the state was that it was bodies of armed men, prisons, etc. And when you strip everything else away, when you strip away the processes of co-option that exist in parliamentary democracies, certainly the whole business of parliament, of the elections, when you strip away the media, when you strip away the civil service, all of which are essential parts of the normal day-to-day operating of a state, what you have left at moments of crisis, and particularly in moments of revolutionary crisis, is the absolutely essential, irreducible core of the state machine, which is its ability to enforce its will by physical force. One sociological definition of a state is that it is the body which has the sole legitimate use of armed force in a given geographical area. So the armed forces are the essence of any state, but they are a great deal more powerful and a great deal more central to the Egyptian state than most, because not only are they in control of the monopoly of armed force, they are also in direct and indirect control of an enormous part of the Egyptian economy. If you include indirect as well as direct control over sections of the economy, it's said to be perhaps as high as 40%, and the direct control of the economy is said to be 15%. So you have an army which directly controls, for instance, the manufacture of white goods, of refrigerators, of bottled water, of construction in very, very large parts of the economy. So when you have the Egyptian army moving, you have not just the normal armed forces of the capitalist class, but you have a very large chunk of the capitalist class itself directly as part of that institution. So if there was ever going to be a second revolutionary moment in Egypt, it would always be a moment where it threatened that power. You can have changes of government, You can have transformations in the media. You can have purges and reorganisation in the civil service, but if there's ever to be a moment where the fundamental nature of the society is challenged, it was always going to be a moment where it would challenge the Egyptian army. Now I say that because when you see the coverage, it's quite clear that whatever you think about the two sides involved politically, whatever your political assessment is, one of these sides does indeed still exist with a monopoly of armed force, or as near a monopoly as makes absolutely no difference. There is only one side on the streets of Egypt which has Apache helicopters, which has tanks, which has armoured personnel carriers, which has enormous reserves of CS gas, which has body armour, which has automatic weapons in almost unlimited number, and that is the Egyptian army. And one of the interview at the end there said we paid for that. Well, that's true up to a point, but the other people who are paying for it are the United States of America, to the tune of 1.3 billion in directly military aid to the Egyptian army every year. So those are perhaps some of the key characteristics of the Egyptian army, and of course it's an army which has been in direct political control of Egypt ever since the Nasser coup of the 1950s. 60 years of continual control over the Egyptian state. Of course, every single president of Egypt, up to Mohamed Morsi, came from the armed forces. Nasser himself was an army officer. Sadat was an army officer. Mubarak was an air force officer, and so forth and so on. So you see what we're dealing with here. Now, whatever we want to say about the Muslim Brotherhood, it's not this. Whatever we want to say about its politics, however much differences, and there are very, very significant differences with the Muslim Brotherhood's politics, it is not the armed central core of a state machine. It is not that. What I would say it is, I would say that it's not a kind of ruling party either, in the sense that the Republicans are a ruling party in the United States, or the Tory party is the party of the ruling class in Britain. You know, if there's one political organisation to which the vast majority of the British capitalist class look to secure its interests, it is the Tory. It is the Tory party. The degree of interpenetration between the economic ruling class and the Tory party is very, very high. Is very, very high indeed. When Labour's in power in this country, there is a degree of tension sometimes under some Labour governments over some issues with the capitalist class as a whole. When the Tory party's in power, there may be arguments among the family, but they're one family. And the Muslim Brotherhood is not a party in that sense. It is not a direct representative of the Egyptian ruling class. It may, in fundamental ways, not be a party which is opposed to the existence of the capitalist system, certainly not opposed to the parliamentary version of a capitalist state, but it is not the direct and chosen representative of the Egyptian ruling class in the way that the Republican Party or even the Democrat Party is in the United States, or the Tory Party is in this country. It is in many ways a bit of jargon, but it is really a contradictory class formation. That is, it has a leadership which is often from the middle classes. Sometimes a few of the representatives of it are from the upper classes. Certainly there are businessmen involved in it, sometimes quite big ones, many more very small ones, but it also has a considerable mass base among people who are very much poorer than that, among sections of workers. Even today, you see the polls in Egypt say that some 30%, even this after the coup, that some 30%, when there was a high tide of nationalism running in the army's favour in large sections of Egyptian society. Even now, the opinion poll in the Economist says that the Muslim Brotherhood has something like 30% of support in Egyptian society. It's a mass organisation, and because it had a long history of opposition to the Mubarak state, because in a society where there's very little state welfare, it provides a degree of welfare provision. It has deep roots in Egyptian society. And so I think those analyses which say that it's a single reactionary bloc, or some analysis which say that it's a kind of fascist party, an Islamic fascist party, I think these things are very, very badly, misguided. And the result of that misguided analysis is, of course, once again, to say that we have nothing to choose between the army and these people. Now, if that were true, of course, if the EDL or the BNP in this country were a mass fascist party and the British Army were mowing them down in the streets, you might be hard put to choose sides. But that is not the situation that exists in Europe, and it's not an accurate characterisation of the Brotherhood either. It is, of course, a religious organisation. It is, of course, a conservative organisation in many aspects. But I just want to give you some real sense, or some sort of broader sense of where it stands. I just thought this is a book which they produced under opposition to Mubarak, called On General Principles of Reform in Egypt. When the Brotherhood did attend the Cairo conferences, which many of us from the anti-war movement were involved in for 10 years before the Egyptian revolution, the Brotherhood for the last 8 years of those participated in them as a democratic movement, alongside labour movement organisations, alongside peasant organisations, alongside the revolutionary left. And there were some interesting debates and arguments and moments there. I remember we used to stand on the steps of the journalist syndicate in Cairo protesting, surrounded by the security forces. And the first time the Brotherhood came, they would hold up the Quran and only chant Islamic slogans. By the third year they were there, the same people with the Quran in their hand were chanting communists and Islamists will always be united, which was, I'm not saying this is characteristic of the organisation, but fascist organisations don't do that. Tory organisations don't do that. They don't engage with the revolutionary left and are part of an opposition movement in that sense. I just want to read you two parts on this. This is a bit on the economy. It says, we work on encouraging private sector through well-studied privatisation programmes characterised by a fair evaluation of public projects to be privatised, coupled with total transparency. This should be in line with preserving the complete rights of labourers. We also believe in the necessity of establishing giant public projects given through economic, funding and technical feasibility studies, doubled with public participation in informing about them and studying and authorising them. Now that's a statement of a mixed economy. That's a statement that we back the market, but at the same time we want some publicly owned utilities. It is, in formal terms, actually to the left of the current policy of the Labour Party, which isn't in favour of any nationalised or public utilities as a matter of fact. Let me just read you also, because it's often a controversial question, from the section about women. Now, this is a conservative religious organisation. It probably has policies not like many labour movement organisations in the West today, probably not unlike the Christian Democrat parties in Europe. But this is what it says. It says, women is under the obligation, just like the man, to bear full legal and criminal responsibilities just like him. Her financial status is not limited. All her financial dealings and decisions are legal and can be carried out without the consent of a father, a husband, a brother, or anyone else. The area of man's superiority over his wife is limited to matrimonial partnership. And it goes on, we therefore believe woman is entitled to participate in parliamentary elections and the like, woman is entitled to be a member of parliament, or the likes, in the frame that preserves her decency, neutrality and dignity. Now, these are not actually reactionary points of view, they're conservative points of view, conservative by the general standards of Western society today, probably not conservative by the general standards of Britain in, say, 1950. So whatever you like to say about this organisation, I've got a lot more to say about its conduct when it was in government for a year. To characterise this as if it were the Tory party, a wholly reactionary organisation, a direct emanation of the power of the ruling class, or if, even more ridiculously, it were a fascist organisation, is simply a mistake in my view. Now I'll come back to this. I'm just going to talk a little bit. I'll talk a little bit now about the dynamic of the revolution, because the trouble is, a definitional analysis like that only tells you so much. It's necessary when there's so much confusion that you just, do the business of putting things with their right labels and in their right boxes, but that only ever tells you so much. What is now necessary is to see what these forces look like, not by their written declarations, not by how you can formally define them, but how they interact in the process of a very fast-moving and dynamic revolutionary process. And here, to reduce it to its essentials, I want to just say something about the general pattern of the Egyptian revolution in particular. It's often true generally of revolutions, generally of the Arab revolutions, generally of revolutionary processes throughout the ages. What happens characteristically is this, that there is a regime which becomes incredibly socially isolated at the point where it is first hit by a revolutionary wave. It's exhausted its bases of support in the society. It virtually has no support, not necessarily even among the masses, but among large sectors of the middle class and even some natural sections of its own supporters. And this is almost universally true in a revolution. This is exactly what happened to the government of Charles I in the English Revolution of the 1640s. It's exactly what happened to Louis XVI at the beginning of the French Revolution. It's exactly what happened to the Tsar at the beginning of the Russian Revolution. It's exactly what happened to the Kaiser at the beginning of the German Revolution. It is how revolutions begin. But that broad mass of people who are the people who drive the old regime from power necessarily do so with different goals in mind. Some of them want a complete transformation of the system, and many people in Egypt wanted not just to get rid of Mubarak, but to get rid of the whole system of Mubarak's government. Not just to get rid of the whole system of Mubarak's government, but to get rid of the army and the police, which they knew were its foremost defenders. Some people wanted further than that, wanted a society in which 40% of the Egyptian population weren't living on $2 a day, wanted an economic transformation as well as a political transformation. Now, all those people, with all those different views of what the revolution should end up like, were all against Mubarak when it began. What happens in the process of a revolution is that those political and social and class forces begin to differentiate, begin to go through a learning experience of what's actually at stake, where the real power lies, what the forms of activity are that are necessary to take the revolution forward. Leon Trotsky said that in a revolution, the masses come to consciousness through the method of successive approximations. In other words, they try one solution, and it doesn't do what they think it will do, so they kind of back up, it's one dead end. And then they try another solution, and it doesn't quite deliver, or doesn't deliver what some of them want. So there's a process of debate, discussion, political contestation, they back up, and they try again. And the Egyptian revolution is just like this. Just like this. First of all, Mubarak goes, but the old system's there. There's military rule. So people say, okay, we don't want military rule. They force the military into granting parliamentary and presidential elections. There's a huge contestation around this. Morsi eventually wins with just over 50% of the vote. And in the course of the Brotherhood's time in power, there's a process by which people become massively disillusioned with the Morsi government, because what it does is, it does the classic thing that you should never do if you come to power in a revolutionary situation, and that is to compromise with the counter-revolutionary forces in the society. So, I mean, it was Antoine Saint-Just's phrase in the French Revolution that those who half make a revolution dig their own grave. And the Morsi government undoubtedly dug its own grave. It did very little about the situation of the poorest sections of society. It did very little to challenge the capitalist methods of ownership, partly because, as you read, it's in favour of them. But worse than that, it compromised continually with the security apparatus, the deep state in Egypt. So General El-Sisi was Mohamed Morsi's appointment as head of the army after General Tantawi was removed. The Interior Minister, who today is presiding over the shooting down of Brotherhood in their hundreds and thousands on the street, was an Interior Minister put in that post, the same man, by Morsi when he was president. When Morsi made speeches praising the Egyptian police, when every Egyptian involved in the Egyptian revolution knows that the police are the Egyptian revolution's most deadly enemy, it undercuts the level of support, and that, after a year, exploded in the 30th of June movement, and exploded in a demand for fresh elections. We should never forget that that was what was demanded on the 30th on 30th of June. Now, the whole crisis really of the Egyptian revolution is to do with, how can I put it, a kind of absence of a institution which the revolutionary forces can use to mobilise, guide, debate and take the revolution forward. It's an absolutely extraordinary situation that a revolution as deep as this, as profound as this, as long-lasting as this, hasn't pursued this kind of institution, because every other revolution on this scale does precisely this. The English Revolution produced the Long Parliament, which led the revolutionary struggle against Charles I and the Royalists. The French Revolution produced the National Convention, the National Assembly, which was the forum for all revolutionary forces from left to right, which took on the aristocracy, the old state, and Louis XVI. The Russian Revolution, of course, produced the Workers' Councils, which were a rival to the Provisional Government and the old order, and organised the revolutionary forces from left to right against the old order. The Egyptian revolution is almost its defining characteristic, and the thing which is reproducing this crisis time and time again, is that it never has created a legislative assembly, a constituent assembly, popular councils on that scale. And so its characteristic method of operation is that when there's a crisis, masses stream onto the streets, they occupy to here, there's a huge social conflagration which hits the old order, but it's almost like it shakes the tree, but somebody else always picks up the apple. So it shook the tree with Mubarak, but SCAF picked up the apple. It shook the tree of SCAF, but Morsi picked up the apple. It shook the tree of Morsi, but now the army, because there is an absence of revolutionary forces, has now begun to conduct a counter-revolutionary offensive under the name of attacking the Muslim Brotherhood, which is going to, if it isn't halted, eradicate the entire revolutionary initiative from this point on. And everything you see is returning us to this point. There has been no point since the original revolution where Tahrir Square was surrounded by barbed wire and where it's impossible to assemble in it, but that's the situation in Cairo today. We've seen today the release of Mubarak, and the day before that the release of Mubarak's last Prime Minister. The old guard are being released from jail. There is a state of emergency which is going to last a month, and a curfew. The same laws that are being used against the Muslim Brotherhood have been used to break a strike of petroleum workers and to detain their leaders. It's absolutely clear where the army want this dynamic to go. They want to reinstitute their own power, and they want to crush not just the Brotherhood, but any possibility that there will be further additions of mass mobilisation which can transform the situation. They may want to do it with a facade of a civilian government. They may want to do it by direct military rule. I don't think they've been able to decide what they will do with that, because the situation is still in flux. But that's the threat. The threat is that the popular mobilisation against Morsi will end in a right-wing domination by the army, with a reconstitution of the Egyptian ruling class, a reimposition of everything that the revolution was against when it exploded in 2000 and 2011. Final word I'll say is just about how I think the left should conduct itself in this situation, both internationally and in Egypt itself. In these circumstances, although we have a profound, the bits that I read out about the Brotherhood, I have profound differences, absolutely profound differences with their view about the economy. I have profound differences with their view on practically everything. And I certainly have, and did, as did the entire left, attack them for the Urim government when they were compromising with the old state. But the truth of the matter is the Egyptian army is using the attack on the Muslim Brotherhood to close down the revolution. And in those circumstances, we are against what the army is doing. We do not think that the Muslim Brotherhood should be shot down in their thousands. The army should go back to barracks. We do not think there should be a state of emergency. We do not think there should be a curfew. We do not think that the Muslim Brotherhood leaders should be in jail and detained entirely illegally. And we do not think that the moves to have them banned permanently and unable to participate in political life should continue. These are tools which are being used predominantly against them today, but will be used against us all from this moment on. And in that sense, I think it's rather like the moment in the Russian Revolution where the Provisional Government, which the Bolsheviks were entirely against and opposed to, because it was continuing to conduct, sending actually millions, far more than even the Egyptian army or indeed the Brotherhood could conceivably think of, were sent to their deaths by the Provisional Government after the Tsar had fallen. This was a government that had the left in it, but had the establishment in it as well. But when that government was threatened by an army coup, led by a Russian army general called Kornilov, the Bolsheviks, even though the Provisional Government, led by Kerensky, currently had Leon Trotsky in jail, where Lenin was on the run disguised as a worker because he had fear of being in jail. When that government was smashing up the Bolsheviks' printing presses, they conducted a fight in solidarity to defend the Provisional Government against the right-wing coup, because they knew unless they conducted that argument, they would be next. As Trotsky said, if Kornilov had succeeded, the word for fascism would have been a Russian word, not an Italian word. And they also knew that if they did this, they would emerge strengthened after it. As Lenin famously said, we will rest our rifle on Kerensky's shoulder to shoot at Kornilov. But when Kornilov has been shot, the fewer questions about Kerensky, the better. In other words, it would have shifted, and did shift, the revolution back to the left again. Because a combined effort had destroyed that chance for a right-wing coup, the road to the left opened up again. If they hadn't done that, the road to the left would have been permanently sealed by the Russian counter-revolutionary forces.
Thank you, John. Right, well, I think that's probably opened up quite a lot of topics of discussion and questions, and I'm delighted to see that we have the vast majority of our audience is women. So I hope we will have a lot of women participating in this discussion. I should have probably introduced myself as the chair. I'm Tansy Hoskins. I'm a member of Counterfire and a member now of London Counterfire. And just before we start the discussion, I wanted to let everybody know that there is a Counterfire members and supporters meeting happening on Saturday the 31st of August, and that's at the Marchmont Community Centre in Marchmont Street, and it's from 12 o'clock till 5 o'clock. So everybody here, I'd like to extend the invitation to everyone. If you're a member of Counterfire, a supporter of Counterfire, or just curious about issues like Egypt and austerity and everything that's going on, please do come along. That's Saturday the 31st of August. So can I have a show of hands? Has anybody got any questions for John, or any comments of their own about the ongoing situation in Egypt? See if there's a few people. Okay, do you want to go for it?
Well, thank you. It was very
slightly different register inside Egypt and outside. The simpler one to explain, I guess, is the international appeal. I mean, in a way, I mean, it's not really very sophisticated, is it? You know, SCAF think, okay, we're deeply unpopular because of this. What's the one thing that the West's been banging on about for the past decade and more? War on terror. Let's call these people terrorists, and that should work. And that's why even on the Egyptian Arabic channels, it's got the tagline running in English: Egypt at war with terrorism. Now, I mean, you know, frankly, this isn't a very high degree of sophistication. I think the more interesting question, and by the way, I don't think it's really working. There are two places where it is working, but for slightly other reasons. It's working in Saudi Arabia. They really like it, and they're supporting the Egyptian military, and it's working for Israel. They really like it, and they're supporting the Egyptian military. And my view is, if you had no other way of determining how reactionary the coup was, the fact that it's got support from both the Saudis and the Israelis, that should get you to the right point. You can probably triangulate most political positions in life by opposition to the Israelis. But anyway, that's another matter. I think the reason why it's working inside Egypt is actually at a level of disconnect between what people are angry with and the name that it's being given. And that's comes back to the problem of institutional representation. If you have a National Assembly or Soviets or something, different political currents get together inside the revolution, the revolutionary socialists, the Nasserists, the unions, the women's organisations, and they debate what's going on in a proper systematic forum. Now that isn't available to you into here, and I think one of the reasons why some of the Nasserites, and sadly one of the people that we work with very closely in the Cairo conference, Kamal Abu-Aita, who's the head of the Tax Collectors Union, the Union Federation, is now Minister of Labour in this government that's shooting down, well actually quite a lot of his own members, so Muslim Brotherhood members are members of trade unions, shooting them down in the street, is because there is no institutional thing. When the socialist ministers joined the Provisional Government in Russia, the Soviet went bonkers. It went absolutely mad. So you shouldn't do this, quit the government, etc., etc., etc. There isn't that kind of organised political pressure. So things, the names of things and the discontent that produces them become decoupled. The 30th of June was a mass demonstration for free elections, but it got a military dictatorship back in power. The discontent with the Brotherhood isn't because they're terrorists. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood isn't a terrorist organisation in that sense. In Egypt in the past, there have been. The Jama'at Islamiyah in the 90s was a terrorist organisation. There are terrorist organisations operating in the Sinai. By and large, they're not really. They're not the Muslim Brotherhood in any serious sense. So there's a disconnect produced by the fact that the revolution doesn't have an institution which can articulate a political position other than in the broadest possible terms. We don't like this government, or we don't like that government, really, and it doesn't get much more refined than that because there isn't an institutional framework to make it so. Turkey, I think the Turkish foreign policy since the beginning of the Arab uprisings has really been to say, okay, there's an opportunity for a kind of new Ottomanism here. We've got links and understanding and a commonality in religion with sections of the people in the Arab revolutions, which the rest of the West hasn't got. We can become the bridge, the Western bridge into the Arab revolution. I think that's Erdogan's policy. I think it's his policy on Syria. I think it's why he slams the Israelis. It's a passport into the Arab revolutions. Now the trouble is, the Arab revolutions have suddenly become much more complex than they were when this policy was formed, and so the wheels are coming, to a certain extent, the wheels are coming off the wagon, because now you're being asked to choose sides. Now you can see where Erdogan is going with that, but it's essentially an opportunist foreign policy, and therefore it's even when it seems to be attacking the right targets, I don't think it's born out of a genuine solidarity with the masses struggling. It's born out of a desire to position Turkey in a more powerful position in a Middle East where the existing powers are their influence is being eradicated by the complexities and the changes in the situation. Internal dynamics in SCAF, I doubt it, and I doubt it now, because at the moment they seem to be very, very successful with this. Internal dynamics in a high command happen when they're not doing very well. So I would say there have been 2 points. In the last days before Mubarak fell, I think there was obviously an argument which said, look, there are middle-ranking army officers appearing in Tahrir Square. We either get rid of Mubarak or this is going to split the army. And I think with the 30th of June, they thought either we get rid of Morsi and put the army in charge, or this lot are going to get rid of Morsi and the revolution will ratchet to the left, and then God knows where it'll stop. So I think that's and that, to be honest, that's the internal dynamic that matters. I don't think it's present at the moment, but there's no doubt that it can return. The military are not popular with large sections of the Egyptian population, despite the dynamic that it's got at the moment. People do remember the no SCAF, the no military trials, what it was like when they took power after Mubarak fell. And I think that dynamic can, if it's a race against time, can the army get the lid on it before that dynamic begins to reappear? I think that dynamic is already beginning to reappear, but it's late, it's weak, and the army are a long way down the road, which isn't to say that it can't happen. The Egyptian revolution has an amazing capacity to do that. Finally, on the Muslim Brotherhood, I think to just sort of make it as precise a parallel as I can, I think it is an internally contradictory class formation in the way that a Labour Party in this country is, and not a monolithic class organisation like the Tory Party or like fascist organisations are. I'm a little bit nervous about pushing that, because obviously the class structure in the West, the depths of the labour movement, all are different to Egypt. It's perhaps a little bit like some national liberation movements are, which can have very large working class and poor following, but at the same time have a leadership which is institutionally willing to go along with the way in which neoliberalism and the state operate. So, I mean, it's in that kind of territory that I think, well, and there's a lot to criticise. There's a lot to, you know, especially for revolutionaries, there's a lot not to agree with the Brotherhood on. But whatever you think about that, it's not what SCAF is.
Sorry, didn't realise you were finished so quickly. Before. Okay, I'm going to take another round of questions if people have more questions. But before I do, I just want to mention something else that people might be interested in. So, Samir, did you want to say a bit about the London Counterfire?
Sure. Okay. Well, this event has been hosted by London Counterfire, which is a local group, part of Counterfire National Group. It's quite new. This is the first event we've staged. The reason we set up this group is because Counterfire is a growing organisation. We have, I think, over 100 members now in London who are very talented, very active. They want to organise around the group. So that's why we set it up. There's also a huge amount going on in the world, in this country at the moment. We have the People's Assembly. We have this huge Manchester march in Manchester against the Tory conference between us September. We have the Student People's Assembly against austerity on the 2nd of November. We have National Day of Civil Disobedience on the 5th of November. So there's a huge amount going on at the moment. And we thought it was important to have a group of...
Bring John back in for about 4 to 5 minutes just to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, well, let me sort of respond to that. In actual fact, I think, as I read from their document, the Muslim Brotherhood stance is for a mixed economy. So, but let's, for the sake of argument, say that they're entirely neoliberal, and some of the political Islam groups are. I don't think you can get to a point because of that of ignoring the fact that they have a popular base. I mean, after all, the Labour Party's official policy in this country is entirely neoliberal. Entirely neoliberal. The reason that the Labour Party is different from the Tory Party is because of its base, because it is composed of workers, because it is overwhelmingly workers who vote for it, it's organised workers who fund it, it is based on a different class and in a different class. And the Muslim Brotherhood is not like a Tory party, and is more like a Labour Party, because although the policy is right-wing, the composition of the party, what it's made out of, is different. And that's very, very important distinction to make. Because if you operate alongside the Labour Party, you can win working class members of the Labour Party to a position which is not neoliberal. If you operate side along the rank and file of the Tory Party, your chances of winning them from neoliberalism are precisely zero. So this is an argument for engagement with, solidarity with, not agreement over neoliberalism. And in any case, to be honest, the answer to neoliberalism, however bad it is, isn't shooting people down in their thousands in the street. It's not an answer to neoliberalism. It's a joint struggle against the people who are doing the shooting will put you in a position where you can conduct an argument about neoliberalism, saying, I don't care if you're shot because you're a neoliberal. That really won't, what that does is, it institutionalizes the power of the Muslim Brotherhood leadership over their members, because their leadership says, look, these people, they don't give a monkeys about you. They think that because you're neoliberal or whatever, it's okay to shoot you down. So it glues the membership of the Brotherhood to its leadership. And secondly, it isolates the left and allows the ruling class to deal with the Brotherhood first and the left second. So in every conceivable sense, it's a misconceived attitude to the problem. And of course, don't believe that Labour organisations aren't capable of doing this. You know, in the German Revolution, it was the SPD, you know, the classic Labour movement organisation that killed Rosa Luxemburg, that killed Karl Liebknecht, that participated in the formation of the Freikorps, which were the cutting edge of the counter-revolution in Germany. So this same logic can apply to organisations which are even more central to the labour movement and even have a stronger working class base than the Brotherhood do. And it's still necessary, as the German communists said, to unite with the SPD, even though they were the murderers of Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, against the threat from the right. And that logic applies in this circumstance as well. On the political vacuum, you can't have a revolution never has a political vacuum in that sense. There are always people, and there were on the left. I mean, you know, if you think of the formation of the Egyptian revolution, it happened from 10 years earlier, from first of all with the popular committees in solidarity with the Second Intifada, then through the anti-war movement when Tahrir Square was occupied for the only other time before 2011, then through the Kifaya, the Enough Democracy movement, through the election of some Brotherhood MPs and then their exclusion from the parliament, through the Mahala and the labour movement agitation. That's the formation, that's the pre-formation of the Egyptian revolution. And those currents, they were dwarfed by the scale of the mobilisation, but they were there. And of course, so was the Brotherhood, which was always a mass organisation, always sustained a mass organisation. And so it was always going to be, in the first instance, the biggest inheritor of the revolutionary wave, even though it was late, even though it didn't fully participate until very late in the day, even though it was always cautious and conservative, it had social roots which nobody else really had. The opportunity for the left is that the Morsi government did a lot to destroy that credibility, but in order to profit from that, you have to defend them or keep the space open where you can politically profit from it, and you can't politically profit from it if SCAF closed down the entire revolutionary process here. And that's it's the same point over and over again. I think it's important to understand that even military coups, even though they're conducted, can have a popular element to them. You know, the military can never just stand on its own tanks. It always has to have some basis of support inside the society, and sometimes quite large bases of popular support. But you can't allow that to be the only thing which evaluates which direction events are in. You have to take the whole picture of the class struggle, all the different classes, the direction of travel, the particular dynamic at any one point. That's how it's necessary to assess it. Finally, just a question about I don't think that the actual terrorist groups, the Al-Qaeda and whatnot, I think they're an insignificant part of what's going on numerically, politically. I don't think it really calibrates. I mean, it probably helps SCAF to demonise the Brotherhood, to articulate the terrorism thing, but as practical politics here or really in Egypt, I don't think it's there. It's not a mass organisation by any stretch of the imagination, and isn't interested in becoming one, almost by definition, if you're a terrorist organisation. On Algeria, I think you can't say that this isn't one of the seeds that's present in the current circumstance, and it all comes back to the same question. If the only to use the hideous kind of postmodern word, the only narrative that exists is it's either SCAF or the Brotherhood, then civil war, you can see where that could come from. To be honest, if I were in the Brotherhood now, I'd be looking for guns. If you're being mown down in the street by tanks and Apache helicopters and snipers, you're going to look for guns, or some people are going to look for guns. That's what's going to happen. And the responsibility of the left is to intervene in this process and say it's not just about the Brotherhood. The minute you say it's not just about the Brotherhood, it's about trade unionists, it's about democracy, it's about all our civil liberties, it's about repopulating Tahrir, it's about retaking the dynamic of the revolution. Once the left says that, the Brotherhood has to agree with it for a start. It can't be separate from that. So it both civilianizes the conflict again, demilitarizes or cuts off the path towards a militarization. It secularizes the thing. It begins to interrupt the whole Copt Muslim hideous dynamic. That the SCAF hit the Brotherhood and the Brotherhood kick the Christians, or some sections of the society do. So this intervention of stopping the battle looking as if it's simply between the army and the Brotherhood, or institutionalise it as a question of the future of the revolution, with all the revolutionary forces defending the Brotherhood because they're defending their own future. This is the thing that can interrupt what dynamic there is towards civil war, because this is a civil war. The state wins a civil war, and therefore what you're doing, what that dynamic does, is ultimately it reinforces the chances of SCAF becoming victorious in the counter-revolution. Finally, on imperialism, this is Alice is absolutely right. This is never not there. You know, I had a debate on Twitter with somebody who said, "What's progressive about the Brotherhood?" Well, actually, it's against American imperialism. It's for the Palestinians. Those two things on its own. And they replied to me and said, "But these aren't core issues." Well, I'm sorry. In the Middle East, this is the core issue. And if there were no other reason for identification, that would be certainly a very strong one. And SCAF know this. They're playing the anti-American card now. They're playing it very, very hard. They're saying, "You're talking about cutting off aid to us. We'll cut off aid to you before you cut off aid to us. You're 1.3 million. We've got the Saudis. We don't need you." And that's playing. It's playing. And if you don't interrupt their fake anti-imperialism with a genuine anti-imperialism, which does stand with an organisation which has been anti-imperialist, whatever its other problems, from its birth, then the whole difficulty. So every time we come to this question, we come back to the same issue. We come back to the question of how is the left going to intervene in this to stop the army and to reconstitute a revolutionary front which is broader than the Brotherhood, which demilitarises it and which begins to get it back on the front foot. Now, it's a dark moment. I don't see where that's coming from, except that I do know that millions of Egyptians do understand, whatever the mood, the current mood in sections of the society, do understand that the military is not their friend. You can't live through 60 years of military dictatorship and not have that sense.
Well, thank you very much everyone for coming. One final thing I wanted to mention is that the next London Counterfire event is on the 12th of September and is actually on Chile and Allende and Pinochet and the coup. We have the first English language biography of Allende is being published at the moment, and we've got the author of that coming to discuss the coup, and that will probably be back here. But if you should like our page on Facebook and keep in touch with us and sign up with us give us your email, and we'll make sure you know about the next event. So thank you everyone for coming.